Daniel chapter 7 takes place roughly 50 years after Daniel chapter 2. But remarkably, Daniel chapter 7 seems to pick up on the conversation that the Lord was having with Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 2. A lot of commentators, and the traditional interpretation of this is that there are some clear parallels between the four kingdoms and that statue of Daniel chapter 2 and the four beasts that are described here in Daniel chapter 7. Not all commentators see it that way, and you don't have to see it that way for the interpretations to be true, but it just seems rational. It just kind of rationalizes itself as we get through the interpretations and kind of see the progression just matches so closely. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. This is the first year of Belshazzar, which would have been a successor to Nebuchadnezzar. Again, this is 50 years later now, and Daniel, still in a position of authority in Babylon, he sees this dream. He has this dream and vision of his head when he laid in his bed, and he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, "I saw in my vision by night," would be a dream, "and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the sea, and four great beasts came up out of the sea that were all different from one another." Now, these four winds of heaven are typically considered to be prophetic language for God's influence in the region that's surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. Now, remember, in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel had given this awesome kind of prayer of praise where he said, it's God who changes times and seasons, and he raises up kings and tears them down, that kind of thing. That's exactly the conversation that's being picked up on here. The four winds of heaven are stirring the sea, and it's influencing the nations on the earth, which is, again, directly verified by an angel that that's what this means in verse 17, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. The four beasts that emerged from the sea are commonly interpreted as four subsequent or successive kingdoms. They're world empires, each one inheriting the attributes, or at least some of the attributes, of the last, so that all are at least partially represented in the final beast. So the first beast, and I've tried to color code it. I actually try to color code it by which beast we're talking about. My color coding might not be perfectly consistent, but it's actually pretty close. Even when we get into the interpretations, I try to keep it where we're going to be able to keep track. The first beast was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. Now, interestingly, a lot of commentators point out that in the ruins of Babylon have been found a lot of depictions of winged lions. That seems like a lion was a favorite sort of animal statue and artwork for Nebuchadnezzar. And so you would see sometimes these winged lions that were carved into decorations on different parts of Babylon. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up, and on the ground it was made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and had the mind of a man was given to it. And interestingly, this little part here, if we were to just compare it to Daniel chapter 2, this would kind of be the head of fine gold. And Daniel had told Nebuchadnezzar that he represented this beast. And so it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar really identified himself with this winged lion type of archetype. And here, or it's looking like we're looking at Babylon again with this first beast here. The lion's experience of having its wings plucked off and that kind of thing is generally understood to represent Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation and restoration that's described in Daniel chapter 4. And Daniel kind of loses his sanity and then regains it as he's humbled. He humbles himself before the Lord. And so it's thought that that's what it means. There's not really a real sure, this is that, definite. The angel doesn't really describe exactly what that means otherwise. So that's kind of the best guess. The next beast, and behold, another beast. A second one was like a bear, and it raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, which usually is commonly understood to be like it had prey in its mouth. It had taken a bite of flesh and had these ribs that it was chewing on in its teeth. And it was told, "Arise and devour much flesh." Now, this second beast, this devouring bear, is traditionally understood to be represented or to represent the Medo-Persian Empire, which would kind of mirror the sequence of Daniel 2 again. So we've got the chest and arms of silver, which is another kingdom that would rise after Babylon. which would have been Cyrus and Medo-Persia. So there you have that one. After this, I looked and behold another beast, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. So it would be a very, very fast leopard. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now this third beast, the 4-winged leopard with 4 heads, I don't know, I'll have to put that into AI to get a picture of what that would look like, but it was traditionally understood to represent Greece and Alexander the Great, which would mirror the sequence of Daniel chapter 2. So it's the middle kind of torso of bronze. And this third kingdom is another kingdom that comes after, the silver chest. So it kind of is following the sequence of what we understand with our historical hindsight. We've got this sequence of Babylon is succeeded by Persia, is succeeded by Greece. That's what we've come to. And that's truly what played out in history. So we got this very rapid leopard, which would seem to very accurately describe Alexander the Great, but we've also got these 4 heads. And of course, those 4 heads are often interpreted to represent the 4 divisions of Alexander's empire after his death, when that whole kingdom is divided into 4 parts. And I've got those listed in the notes there. We'll come back to that a little bit later. This divided kingdom is, kind of the 4 heads, they often say, of this leopard. Jumping down now to the 4th beast. And I saw in the night visions, which would be the dream, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful, and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. Obviously, the feet were an important part of Daniel chapter 2 and that 4th kingdom there. So that's usually drawn as sort of a rational parallel. Great teeth, feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So just before we get into those horns, that 4th beast with 10 horns and these iron teeth and crushing feet is traditionally thought to represent maybe the Seleucid kingdom that comes after Alexander the Great, or possibly even Rome. Many of the commentators that would have been way back in the turn of, the end of kind of the BC era and in the 1st century of AD, commonly seem to think that Rome would be that 4th kingdom. And so that was kind of the tradition dating all the way back then. And that's kind of, I think, often shared as a rabbinical tradition in Judaism. Although you could maybe say it's the Seleucid kingdom, that section of, those 4 heads. And we can talk more about that later on, or even in the notes. It's actually not that important that we know for certain what would be the historical representation of it, because there's something different about that kingdom. And that difference usually comes to be understood as that kingdom was really meant to be a foreshadowing of the influence of that 4th kingdom right before the Messianic age and that final generation. And so, yes, there can be historical foreshadowings that may represent this 4th kingdom, but that it was more than just a historical kingdom, but it came to represent something that would take place at the end of the age, just preceding when the Messiah would come and establish an everlasting kingdom. And so there's both kind of interim historical foreshadowings and this final fulfillment at the end of the age that is what would be a very appropriate interpretation, and actually becomes demonstrated to be the interpretation of the New Testament. That became how the New Testament would come back and actually interpret this, which we will look at. We'll verify that when we get to the New Testament. We just hadn't gotten there yet in our study, but we will, and that'll be there. So we've got, I've included that little section of Daniel chapter 2 about that 4th kingdom with the legs of iron and partly of clay. It's kind of this composite kingdom that's made up of several different parts, not always perfectly mixing, but trying to work together. And it's got these toes. I mean, that kingdom had toes, and this kingdom has horns. And some commentators think, well, maybe the toes correlate to the horns. Maybe. Again, that might be too deep into the weeds and not entirely necessary for us to really get the gist of the interpretation, which the angel is going to give us here in a minute. But let's just move on now to the horns. Daniel focuses in on those 10 horns that were on that fourth beast. And behold, there came among them another horn, a 11th horn, a little horn, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. So this 11th horn arises and it uproots 3 of the original 10. And behold, in this little horn were eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great things. So as Daniel focuses on these 10 horns, he sees this 11th horn rise to power among the 10, and it displaces the 10. Now these horns are often thought to, and the angel will later clarify, that these horns represent rulers of nations. So this kind of composite kingdom made up of iron and clay and these kind of different parts hodgepodge together are these 10 kingdoms, these 10 kings, 10 rulers of different nations that form this wicked coalition. Now, where have we heard that before? This wicked confederation. Well, that takes us all the way back to chapters we've studied, like Psalm chapter 2. Obviously, I mean, it would seem to flow with a lot of the narrative that we've been unpacking so far historically. So here we go. We see this kind of composite wicked coalition that's working together, but up from among that coalition comes a new leader, a young leader, who kills 3 of those kings, or uproots them in some kind of way. It seems like kills, but he supplants them. And this little horn, this new, young, ambitious ruler has these eyes of a man. And it's fun to go through. I've gone through, I don't even want to tell you how many commentaries I've been going through, and they all seem to have different things to say about what the eyes of a man and the mouth speaking great things might represent. But definitely, I think it's safe to say, and I think most commentators would agree, it would be safe to consider that the eyes of a man would represent this very prideful ambition. He has all the prideful ambition, like the culmination of all human prideful ambition of all mankind. But more than that, his eyes also represent vision and intelligence, unparalleled intelligence to pursue that ambition, which is a very dangerous combination. So to have those eyes that are going to typify all of the arrogance and ambition and vision and intelligence of mankind is going to be a very difficult and challenging and dangerous combination. And the mouth speaking great things, he has this mouth that is just kind of voicing that ambition and giving language to it. You could even say a mouth that was even decreeing very great things, but we'll go on to look at that in the interpretation a little bit more. So then we get to verses 9 and 10. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, his hair on his head, pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, wheels of burning fire, a stream of fire issued and came out from before him. I wonder if you kind of catch the point that everything in God's presence is on fire. Not necessarily being consumed in like a judgment, wrathful fire, but everything in his presence is on fire. And what does that fire represent? Well, who knows? Maybe it could represent his wrath, but obviously he's got like righteous living beings who are in that presence among that fire, and they're not being burned. But it's just this fire of his presence. I think that's interesting. Some of you may be more familiar with that, and the fire of God's presence being felt and seen. Obviously, with the Pentecost, what happened in Pentecost, I mean, who knows? To see flames coming from God's throne that would rest above the heads of all the disciples and those gathered in the upper room. I mean, that's a kind of New Testament example for you. Anyway, let's move on. A stream of fire that issued forth and came out from before him, and 1,000,000 served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The courts sat in judgment, and the books were opened. So here we have heaven's response. Here we go. Heaven has this response to what's occurring on the earth. Here the Lord has stirred the kingdoms, and it has brought forth this 11th horn, this unrighteous leader. and heaven has got to respond, and heaven's going to act. I looked then, because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and I looked, and the beast was killed, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. Now we're going to pause there. Now this is where I want to go to what I put in the notes. I had inserted these cross references in the section for verse 8. I think I want to move them down here to verse 11. So while there are many historical kings that have foreshadowed this very prideful figure, this 11th horn, which could include Sennacherib of Assyria and Antiochus Epiphanes of the Seleucid Empire or kingdom, the 11th horn is ultimately going to culminate in the behavior of the Antichrist. How do we know that? Well, here we go. I got some cross references for you. From Daniel chapter 10. Daniel is talking about Assyria, but he's using Assyria as a prophetic foreshadowing of what the Lord's going to do to conquer Israel's adversaries at the end of the age, and a final kind of wicked Assyrian at the end of the age. And this is how Isaiah describes that wicked end of the age Assyrian. That wicked person, he says he's going to punish the speech of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the boastful look in his eyes. Isn't that interesting? The boastful eyes and the arrogant speech. And look what he says. This is what the Antichrist, this end time adversary, is going to say. He says, by the strength of my own hand, I have done all of this. I have claimed all this power and done all these things. By my wisdom, for I have understanding. And indeed, he is intelligent, but he's taking all the credit, far too much credit for what ultimately God has allowed him to do. Remember, it's the four winds of heaven that are stirring the waters. So he goes on to say, I have removed the boundaries of the people. I have plundered their treasures, which we've talked about. Like a bull, I bring down those who sit on thrones. He's just got this pompous, puffed up attitude about himself. This goes on in Isaiah 14. Isaiah really comes down to it, where this is the thing that the end time Assyrian says, you said in your heart. He even says, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of the assembly. He's talking about Mount Zion. In the far reaches of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will make myself like the Most High. That, is among the most egregious, most boastful ambitions of all humanity, of course, culminating in the attitudes and behaviors of the Antichrist. Amazingly, the writers of Psalm 75 foreshadowed this as well. Just to see this in Psalm 75, you read it and you see what Daniel sees here and you go, oh, these two people might have known each other. Daniel might have read this one, or this psalmist might have read Daniel. It's unclear always in what order exactly some of these were written, but it's fascinating to see how they relate. Look at this. Psalm 75 verses 4 through 8 is up there in the notes. In fact, since we're spending so much time, we've got to look at this. It really matters, actually, that we look at these. It's small on the screen, but if you've got your own Bible, turn with me to Psalm 78. Or open up the notes and you can look at it there. Psalm 75, starting in verse 4. I say to the boastful, do not boast, and to the wicked, don't lift up your horn. Their horn represented their authority and their ambition. Don't lift up your ambitious kind of authority. And don't lift up your horn. Don't lift up your horn on high or speak with a haughty neck, just being presumptuous. Or for not from the east, for not from the east or from the west, not from the wilderness comes lifting up, but it is God who executes judgment, putting down one and lifting up another. Fascinating. I think in all likelihood, even in Daniel's youth growing up in Judah, he very well could have heard Psalm 75. Psalm 75 may have even been written shortly before Daniel's birth. And we've got more to say about that. We've covered Psalm 75 previously, which is why I've included it here. Psalm 83, we've got to look at it. For behold, your enemies make an uproar. Those who hate you, speaking to God, those who hate you have raised their heads. They, they lay crafty plans against your people. They consult together against your treasured ones. He's really talking about that wicked coalition. He's talking about those 10 horns. They consult together against your treasured ones. They say, come, let us wipe them out as a nation. Let the name of Israel be remembered no more. Amazingly, there are even more references that we can look at that pertain to this moment. This Daniel 7 depiction of the courts judging the arrogant ambition and speech of the Antichrist actually continues. And I've got more cross-references, more sections of Isaiah 10, where the Lord responds and says, shall the axe boast over him who hews with it? Meaning the Antichrist is just a tool in God's hand and nothing more. Magnifying itself over him who wields it, obviously. Therefore, the Lord God of hosts will send wasting sickness. Again, it's this judgment like burning fire. The light of Israel will become a fire and the Holy One a flame, and I will burn and devour with thorns and briars in one day. The glory of his forest and his fruitful land, the Lord will destroy both soul and body. Ooh. And it will be as when a sick man wastes away. Now, just to pull back up the verse we're looking at here. The beast was killed and its body destroyed, given over to be burned with fire. Amazingly, there's more. And these are so important. I mean, the fact that we've got these prophets that preceded Daniel and gave us so much insight into this. And Daniel 7 and 8 and 11 and 12 start to tie all this together. And that's why I really want to take a moment and show this to you. Isaiah 14, but you are brought down to Sheol, speaking of the Antichrist, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare and ponder at you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world like a desert, who overthrew its cities and did not let its prisoners go home? About Psalm 75 again, that psalmist goes on to say, all the horns of the wicked will be cut off, but the horns of the righteous will be lifted up. And how true that is in Daniel chapter 7. We'll show you that here in just a moment. Look at what Isaiah had said in Isaiah chapter 30. For a burning place has long been prepared. Indeed, for the king, that wicked Assyrian, that wicked little horn, it is made ready. Its pyre made deep and wide, with fire and wood in abundance. The breath of the Lord, like a stream of sulfur, kindles it. How terrifying. And just because we have to, I have got to bring up Psalm chapter 2. I'm going to put it on screen because we are seeing Psalm 2 in Daniel chapter 7 in such a mighty way. The nations are raging, they plot a vain thing. The kings of the earth assemble themselves, the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them with his wrath and terrify them with his fury, saying, this is the Lord's response. His response is to set his king on his holy hill. He says, as for me, I have set my king on my holy hill. And the sending of that king is the judgment that terrifies and defeats these wicked adversaries. And so, of course, the king responds. He says, I will tell the decree. The Lord said to me, today I've begotten you, and I will make the nations your heritage. Therefore, be wise, O kings, be warned, rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Behold, blessed are all those who take refuge in him. Amazing. So that's exactly what's playing out here. We're seeing Psalm 2 being answered. I looked because the sound of the great boastful words of that horn, and I looked, the beast was killed, its body destroyed, given over to be burned with fire, and the rest of the beast and their dominion was taken away. So other horns, those wicked leaders also taken away. But those beasts, the remnants of those kingdoms, their lives were prolonged for a season. Now, most commentators look at that kind of thinking, well, I don't know, what exactly does that mean? But it really seems to be that though the wicked horns are destroyed, the remnants of those preceding kingdoms are allowed to remain so that they can be absorbed into the Messianic age. And we see that in Psalm 87, where the Lord names Babylon as among the nations that are incorporated and absorbed. Not the city of Babylon, but the kingdom of Babylon is allowed to be absorbed into the kingdoms of God in the Messianic age. So that's an important distinction. That's the lives that are prolonged for a season. They're prolonged long enough to come before the Lord and enter into his kingdom. So that's an important distinction there too. Okay, so Daniel continues. His dream is not over. Here is Psalm 2, verse 4. I have set my king on my holy hill. This is that here playing out in front of Daniel's eyes. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, again, we've heard about one who comes with the clouds of heaven. There came one like the Son of Man, looking like a human in a human form. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom. This is the successor of David. This is the Messiah, that Davidic Messiah, the Davidic covenant fulfilled. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom. All peoples and nations and languages should serve him. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom which will not pass away. This is the uncut stone, the stone not cut by any human hands. It's exactly what Daniel is seeing here. And not only that, but let's just look at Daniel chapter 9 just briefly. Daniel chapter 9, Isaiah chapter 9. Let's just look at Isaiah chapter 9 just briefly. Of the increase of his government and of peace, there will be no end. On the throne of David, over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it, with justice and righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. I love that. And that's exactly what Daniel's witnessing here is the same thing Isaiah saw in Isaiah chapter 9. The peoples and nations and languages, the nations, tribes, and tongues, you could say, will serve him. His dominion is everlasting, which will not pass away, and his kingdom one that will not be destroyed. Now, of course, this is categorically, historically unfulfilled. Nobody who is reading this from the perspective of Daniel with like a historical, grammatical, literal type of interpretation would interpret this to be somewhere historically fulfilled, even in the Messiah's first appearing. And Daniel would even go on to contradict that directly. So don't be confused that this was accomplished at the Messiah's first appearing. It was clearly not. And Daniel came to understand. An angel specifically says this is not his first appearing. It's a second appearing. And of course, Isaiah really demonstrated that distinction as well. Let's get on to the interpretation. So as for Daniel, Daniel does not have the benefit of all of the historical hindsight that we have today. We can look back and go, oh, there came Babylon, was succeeded by Persia, was succeeded by Greece, was succeeded by either, you could say, the Seleucid kingdom or the Roman kingdom. And this all seems obvious because now we've also got the help of the New Testament, what Jesus taught in Matthew 24 and what Paul taught in various chapters and what John teaches in Revelation to give us all this extra commentary on how we should understand. Daniel had none of that. Daniel, again, taken from Judah at the age of 15. Remember, this is 50 years later, and Daniel is still missing portions of Jeremiah that have not reached him yet. And so he's fallen behind a little bit on what's been prophesied. He would have heard Habakkuk. He would have heard the beginning of Jeremiah, but he would have been missing Jeremiah's part yet about the 70 years and later visions that he gives. So, Daniel is just figuring this out as he goes. Gets this dream, and he's like, still in the dream. He says, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me, obviously. Because what does he see? He sees this terrible beast with these boastful words and aggression and terrible things that he does, crushing and trampling and breaking into pieces. And yikes. Of course, he sees, the resolution. That's nice. But that didn't resolve Daniel's anxiety. The vision of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there, one of those angels that's there in that heavenly scene. He just kind of has his interactive dream where he approaches one of them and he says, hey. Now, in so many words, he asked for the truth concerning all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who will arise out of the earth. So the angel confirms that the four winds of heaven stirring the great sea indeed mean God's activity and his influence to raise up kingdoms in that Middle Eastern region, even specifically. The exact identity of those four kings is secondary compared to the expectation of escalating wickedness that culminates with the Antichrist just before the Messiah's second appearing in the Messianic age. Any historical figures that we could assign would merely foreshadow this end of the age scenario. So we could spend all day going, who are the four kings? And that's okay. That's fine. And we can learn from those people. But again, that doesn't mean that this is all fulfilled in history, because the New Testament doesn't interpret this that way. These are foreshadowings of something that's going to occur again in the generation of the Messiah's second appearing. That's the point. So for all the discussions and the many volumes that have been written about who those four kings are, again, it's secondary. So I don't want to spend our whole discussion talking about that. It's useful to an extent. We just need to know where that extent is. But the saints of the Most High, look at this. He says he's given in the summary. There's four kingdoms, but here's the resolution. The saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. This is remarkable because this is something so key to the Great Commission. I don't think the Great Commission is explained in such beautiful and glorious detail anywhere else in the New Testament, anywhere else in the Old Testament up to this point, up to what Daniel sees here in Daniel chapter 7. He sees the coming of the Messianic age. He sees this grand resolution. He sees all of the adversaries defeated. He sees the kingdom of God being established on the earth. And then what happens? He says the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. It's an everlasting kingdom and an everlasting reign. Now, this is remarkable because we can often struggle with our imagination to picture what does the fulfillment of the Great Commission look like? What is in God's heart concerning the fulfillment of the Great Commission when he said, go and make disciples of the nations, and to the fullest extent, teaching them all that I've commanded you, all the way to the ends of the earth and the end of the age, he goes on to say. And this is the resolution of the Great Commission. This is what that whole commission is building towards, is that as the Messiah comes and establishes his kingdom, it's not just the reign of the Messiah, but it's the reign of the saints, that as disciples are made out of nations, that they're reigning with the Messiah forever, and ever. How amazing. I mean, the implications of this on the Great Commission and what Jesus would be thinking when he issues the Great Commission. Again, he's seen this. Jesus was there. I mean, Jesus knows about this. And so if you were to ask Daniel, tell me about the Great Commission and the resolution of history and the everlasting kingdom that's coming. I mean, of course, Daniel was troubled by the tribulation that precedes that for good reason, but the hope and the beautiful glory, the nobility of what the saints are called into is so just cannot be overstated. It's remarkable. So to see that, Daniel still is not satisfied. He says, then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different. Something about that fourth beast was very, very different. It wasn't just this historical beast that passes easily through the pages of history. Now, something's different about that. And I think, in a way, the distinction of that fourth beast is Daniel recognizing that this is a foreshadowing of something that happens before the Messiah arrives, something that the Messiah is sent in response to. And that's really the interpretive key. That's the main indicator that we're looking at the end of the age, because the Messiah is sent in response to this fourth beast. And that's why it's not just some historically fulfilled, irrelevant issue to today, but why it's yet future, and why the New Testament interpreted it as yet future as well. That's the difference in this fourth beast, and which was different from the rest, and it was exceedingly terrifying. Its teeth of iron, remember, it's effective. His ambition actually has the means to act it out. Those teeth it's actually does stuff. It's not just boastful words, but it's terrifying in its actions. It acts on what it claims. It acts on that ambition, and just the power with which it can act is different than all the rest. It is going to be historically, I think what Daniel's seeing is it's historically unprecedented, like different from all the other kingdoms that have come before it. Exceedingly terrifying, with teeth of iron and claws of bronze, with which it devoured and broke into pieces and stamped all that was left with its iron feet. And he wants to know about those 10 horns that were on its head, and that special horn, that extra horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things and seemed to be greater than all its companions. This greater, kind of unsurpassed, unparalleled, ambitious leader. And as I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and at the time when the saints would possess the kingdom. Now that's great. Daniel's like, great. The Ancient of Days is going to come, and the saints are going to possess the kingdom. But wait, that horn is allowed to prevail over them for a season. What? Tell me about that. What's that about? And so Daniel sees that this 11th horn is permitted to prevail physically over those covenant loyalists, which would indicate things like martyrdom and persecution. And although the Antichrist will physically prevail against the saints in that tribulation period, the saints will prevail spiritually, meaning they can still be experiencing renewed life, and there can still even be a revival among the nations under the persecution of the Antichrist. But of course, they prevail absolutely at the resurrection when the Messiah appears. So no matter what the Antichrist comes to do physically, again, they resurrect. They receive an everlasting kingdom, and more than that, resurrected bodies that are everlasting. So the angel says, all right, Daniel, let me help you out. The angel's going to clarify several details about that fourth beast and the 11th horn in particular, because it's really troubled Daniel, as it really troubled Isaiah. Remember, Isaiah was really worried about this before we got to chapter 26. But here we go. Daniel's going through the same thing. Thus, he said, the angel said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the kingdoms, and which shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it into pieces. Now, this is not necessarily yet the Antichrist kingdom, because this is the kingdom of the 10 horns, this coalition. Somehow, this fourth beast is this historically unprecedented power that seizes means to oppress all the earth militarily and economically by some sort of means. It's not specific yet exactly what that looks like, what that means. Later chapters will give us a little bit more insight. And obviously, John in the book of Revelation is going to expound on this in, a lot more detail than what Daniel's going to get here. But that's one of the reasons why we know this is interpreted as yet future, even as we sit here today. But this coalition, this wicked coalition, is this fourth kingdom of these 10 horns. And they are, causing all kinds of havoc and madness, and following their own ambition. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom, so out of that kingdom, we've got these 10 horns, and another horn will rise after them. So the wicked coalition precedes the Antichrist. He arises from within the coalition and will murder 3 of the 10 national leaders when he seizes power. Interestingly, since a lot of people thought that fourth kingdom might represent Rome, or it could represent the Seleucid kingdom, Some people think that those 10 horns are going to come out of that same area. And I think it could be very likely that many of those horns may come out of areas that were previously under the Roman Empire or under the Seleucid, maybe even better. But interestingly, we don't know that for sure necessarily, because it could just be kind of a spiritual successor. It doesn't have to be a literal successor necessarily, unless the Bible's very clear that it is. And we'll get to that to find out more in later chapters. So right now, we're still just kind of speculating on who that would be today. Well, we don't have to figure all that out right now. Let's just get the gist of the prophecy. So we've got this wicked coalition. They're causing havoc. They're devouring the earth, meaning, I don't know, they're not necessarily like this global government necessarily, but you get the idea that they are just exerting a lot of pressure. Let's just put it that way. As for those 10 horns, this is the wicked coalition of Psalm 2 that arise, and this other comes from among them. Not one of the horns, but a new horn. He will arise different from the former ones, and he will put down, he will kill, like he kills, 3 of those 10 kings. He will speak words against the Most High, which we've talked about in detail from Isaiah 14 and so on. And he will wear out the saints of the Most High. So he puts a pressure campaign, because the imagery there is to wear them out like a garment. Like they're like a garment that's being worn out and torn up. So there's this pressure campaign to wear out the saints of the Most High at the end of the age. And they shall think to change the times and the law. So they're literally going to confront the covenant, most specifically. What the times and the law all represent could represent many different things, very boastfully speaking and decreeing their own law, almost like their own religion. But what they're doing really at the heart of it is they are directly confronting the times and law of God. And that's really the point. So you can see it both ways, because the law and religion, you could say, quote unquote, that they seek to institute, that this wicked horn seeks to institute, it does put pressure on the whole earth. Most likely, could be the mark of the beast type of thing and all of that, which we'll get into later when we come to that point. But this would just be a little foreshadowing of that. And, of course, they will be given into his hand. So that's where he will prevail against the saints for a time. But for a time, times, and half a time. So there's actually like a pre-scripted amount of time. And so what all that means, at this point, what time, times, and half a time mean hasn't really been described yet in Scripture. In the whole witness of Scripture, if we were to look at other places where this is referenced, then it kind of is understood as 1 year, 2 years, and half a year. So you end up with 3.5 years. Time, times, and half a time. 3.5 years. And there are going to be later chapters that we will get into that will verify that, because that phrase and is associated with a specific number of days, a length of time elsewhere in the Bible. And that's how we kind of come to understand what that means. So time, times, and half a time. But what is going to be the thing that is, going to end that time, times, and half a time? Well, that season is cut off when the heavenly court sits in judgment and dominion is taken away from that final horn, and he will be consumed and destroyed to the end. And what comes after that? The kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. And his kingdom will be everlasting, and all dominions will serve and obey him. Amazing. So to think of this whole grand storyline, the biblical narrative that's unfolding throughout history that culminates at the end of the age with this rebellion, and then this rising of this horn that initiates the tribulation, and then the persecution and pressure and discipline and all of the angst and distress of that tribulation. But it comes to this point. All is orchestrated specifically to produce an outcome that brings about the most redemptive fulfillment of the Great Commission possible. And it is that the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven are given to the people of God. Can you believe it? They win in the end. Those who are loyal to the covenant come out winning, come out reigning with their Messiah in an everlasting kingdom that all dominions will serve and obey him. Wow. So with that explanation, Daniel is awoken. Here is the end of the matter. And as for me, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed. And this is what happened with Habakkuk, or I should say Habakkuk. And he says, as for me, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed. Well, here he has the distress that Isaiah had. He has the distress of Habakkuk. Here you have, remember, Habakkuk had said, well, great, we've got this great deliverance that's coming, but it's not today. That's the problem. It's not today. Daniel is still in the storyline. The Messiah is not coming yet. What Daniel's recognizing is, wow, there's still yet kingdoms yet ahead of Babylon in which he was serving at the time. And there's great distress yet ahead. Daniel's realizing, I'm probably just going to die. Long before all of this takes place. But not before Daniel would get much more revelation, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But just having that moment, it's a common moment for prophetic witnesses, for people who are going to be prophetic witnesses, especially in that tribulation, in that, experiencing the pain and pressure of that final beast and that final horn. That's difficult. And that's understandable that would be difficult. So you have both. You have the hope of that messianic age, but you have the endurance of those times. If the angel were to have told Daniel, well, don't worry, the Messiah is going to come and all the saints are going to be taken away and they're not going to have to face that horn. But that's not what he says. He says he's going to prevail against the saints of the Most High. They're going to be there. They're going to be a prophetic witness. And it's specifically orchestrated. The Bible says the Lord orchestrates all of the details. All the four winds are working among the great sea to orchestrate the most redemptive outcome, where the gospel, prophetic witness of the gospel, can shine the brightest. And if you were to take that prophetic witness out of that time, then that prophetic witness would be lost. And that redemptive outcome would be lost. And so that's why he's seeing it. He goes, oh, this is troubling. This is distressing. It's going to be great in the end. But, and he carries the matter in his heart. He says there, I kept the matter in my heart. And so he does. And until we get to Daniel chapter 8, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. But that's going to do for Daniel chapter 7.